Mr. Liang Eng-hua.
Mr. Speaker, sir, may I have your permission to answer questions 12 to 17 together?
Yes, please.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I will group the answers into three parts. The state of the Singapore's economy. Second, our medium-term outlook. And third, our strategies to manage the challenges and seize the opportunities. Let me start with the first, the state of the Singapore's economy. The global economic environment has weakened. The IMF has lowered its forecast for global GDP growth this year by 0.2 percentage points from 3.5% to 3.3%. Key uncertainties remain, and these include the US-China trade dispute, which has gone beyond retaliatory tariffs to other areas, including restrictions on technology access and sales. The uncertainty and the risk of a disorderly Brexit, and the political uncertainties of some regional economies. All these have dampened consumer and business confidence. Lower demand in our key export markets has in turn affected our outward-oriented sectors such as electronics, precision engineering, wholesale trade, whose performance remained weak. Although EDB is on track to achieving its foreign investment targets for this year, we are watching business investment decisions very closely. However, there are pockets of strength in our economy. The information and communications sector is expected to grow, given firms' robust demands in IT and digital solutions. The education, health, and social services sector are similarly expected to remain resilient. The construction sector has also turned around after 3 years of contraction. Our labour market remains resilient. Employment continued to increase in the first quarter of the year, while unemployment remains low at 2.2%. In May, MTI projected that our economy would grow between 1.5 to 2.5% this year. MTI will review our forecast in August, taking into account the full set of economic data for the second quarter, as well as the latest external economic conditions. Let me now touch on the second part of my answer and the medium-term outlook for Singapore. The medium-term outlook for the Singapore economy will be determined by the following factors. First, how the US-China trade conflicts develops. Further tariffs will impact more goods and bring about even greater reorganization of the global supply chains. The IMF has estimated that the US-China tariff could cut global economic output by 0.5 percentage point in 2020. Both countries' agreement to resume trade negotiations is welcome news. But there are fundamental differences and disagreement between them, and those will take time to resolve. Prolonged US-China tensions will further undermine global business and consumer confidence. Second, our medium-term outlook will depend on how our major export markets perform. Southeast Asia remains a bright spark, and the US economy is holding up well. However, China's economy could slow down more sharply than expected due to the trade conflict with the US, and this could further dampen its import demand from our region. And Europe needs a decisive resolution on Brexit. While we must weather these immediate challenges, we must, more importantly, navigate the more fundamental shifts in the global economy that will shape our medium to long-term prospects. One is the future of the multilateral trading system. Over the past 40 years, Singapore has benefited from increased economic integration and free trade, underpinned by international rules that apply to countries big and small, and anchored by the WTO, or World Trade Organization. Unfortunately, the multilateral trading system is currently under stress. The risk of economic balkanization, where markets are fragmented and bifurcated, and where trade, talent, and data flows are disrupted, have grown. An increasingly protectionist global environment would reduce our access to markets. When we are all reduced to competing for a slice of a shrinking economic pie, no one wins. Second, the emergence of global rules that may affect our status as a global trading hub. For instance, ongoing discussions to introduce minimum effective tax rates across countries will affect our competitiveness, and carbon caps will constrain our growth potential. We must navigate all this very carefully to preserve our economic space. Third is our ability to harness our new technologies and create new opportunities, especially in the digital economy. I will elaborate on this shortly. Let me now talk about our strategies to manage these challenges and to seize the new opportunities. To overcome these challenges and seize the new opportunities, we will focus our economic strategy on 3 prongs. First, strengthen our fundamentals to distinguish ourselves from the competition. Second, create opportunities by constantly refreshing our offerings to businesses and investors. Third, promote a conducive global and regional business environment with like-minded countries and companies. Let me elaborate on the first. Strengthening our fundamentals to distinguish ourselves amidst the uncertainty. Our fundamentals that have put us in good stead include the following. First, a stable political environment with a competent and united leadership. Second, a pro-business environment including the rule of law, a pro-innovation regulatory environment, and a safe harbor for talent and ideas. Third, superior connectivity in supply chains and distribution networks, spanning the physical dimensions of air, land, and sea, and including the non-physical dimensions of data, finance, talent, technology, and rules. Fourth, a skilled workforce that continues to upgrade itself through training and retraining. Fifth, a progressive tripartite relationship that enables the government, businesses, and labor to overcome our challenges together. Each of these attributes enhances our competitiveness. Collectively, they enable Singapore to be much more than the sum of its individual parts. That is why IMD recently ranked Singapore the world's most competitive economy. We must, however, not rest on our laurels. We must seek to extend our lead by continuing to build on these fundamentals to seize the new opportunities. Let me now touch on the new opportunities, which is the second prong of our economic strategy to constantly refresh our offerings to businesses and investors. As a small and open economy, Singapore must always adapt to changing external circumstances and harness the power of our people and technology. We are making encouraging progress transforming our industries through the work of the Future Economic Council and the Industry Transformation Maps. For example, in advanced manufacturing, we are creating new niche areas such as additive manufacturing and advanced materials. Our strong manufacturing sector will allow us to plug into the global supply chains to meet demand from emerging adjacent industries such as electric vehicles. We will build the next generation industrial and technological estates such as the Jurong Innovation District and the Punggol Digital District. We will also redevelop entire tracts at Sungai Kadut and Kranji for new industries. To enrich our tourism offerings, we are rejuvenating the 2 integrated resorts, transforming Orchard Road, and exploring a new tourism site at Jurong Lake District. We will also be developing Mandai and the Greater Southern Waterfront. These initiatives will enhance our position as a global city for business and leisure. Beyond transforming existing sectors and industries, we are also developing brand new sectors. For example, we are establishing a new agri-food innovation park in Sungai Kadut to realize our agri-tech ambitions. The innovation park will bring together high-tech, precision farming and R&D activities, including indoor plant factories, insect farms, and animal feed production facilities. This will create a completely new range of jobs in agri-tech and give a new generation of young technopreneur farmers the platform to commercialize their ideas. Another new area that we are focusing on is precision medicine. This uses each patient's biological data to more precisely predict, diagnose, and treat diseases. EDB is working hard to bring to Singapore various biotech firms, medical technology firms, and digital health players. I've just opened GlaxoSmithKline, GSK's 2 new manufacturing facilities last week. GSK is investing more than $100 million in Singapore to produce new medicines faster with a lower carbon footprint. GSK's investments reflect their continued confidence in Singapore's future. Besides transforming entire sectors, we will also support our companies to better harness the regional and global opportunities. We already have a vibrant startup sector at Block 71, One North, but we can do a better job helping our companies scale up and grow. Enterprise Singapore will therefore launch the Scale Up Singapore program on Wednesday to provide customized assistance to high-potential companies to grow and internationalize. We must also continue to work hard to translate our R&D capabilities into new business opportunities with our companies. Hence, there's no lack of opportunities and possibilities in Singapore. We can only be constrained by our imagination. To realize all these plans, we'll continue to do our part to promote a conducive global and regional business environment with like-minded countries and companies. This is the 3rd prong of our economic strategy. Digital trade is one such example. It is a key driver of our future economic growth. We will continue to advocate for an integrated global digital economy. This includes our efforts to co-develop international trade rules for the digital economy. This is the reason why we are co-conveners of the Joint Statement Initiative on E-commerce, or JSI, at the WTO, which has since attracted participation from 78 countries. We are also pursuing a Pathfinder Digital Economy Partnership Agreement with Chile and New Zealand, and we're working with Australia on digital economy initiatives which will all help to provide greater opportunities for our businesses in an increasingly digitalized future. We will also continue to strengthen and deepen and diversify our trade links. We will forge new partnerships through ongoing negotiations in the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP as we call it, and the Pacific Alliance Free Trade Agreement. Once concluded, the RCEP will be the world's largest free trade area, bringing together economies accounting for 1/3 of the global GDP and almost half of the world's population. The potential for Singapore businesses will be enormous. At the same time, we will also review and upgrade our current partnerships, including the China-Singapore FTA and the Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement with India. These upgrades will increase the benefits that Singapore companies already gain from the existing FTAs. Today, more than 90% of Singapore's trade are covered by our various free trade agreements. These efforts will ensure that our external linkages remain strong, whatever happens elsewhere in the world. And collectively, they will give Team Singapore the best chance for success. As members can see, we are closely monitoring economic developments. While there are clouds looming, we believe we have the fundamentals to weather the storm. Our economic fundamentals are sound, we are in a strong fiscal position, and we are making good progress in restructuring our economy. The government also stands ready to step up our support for companies and workers in sustaining our core capabilities, enhancing our competitiveness to seize new opportunities. So let us work together, plant the seeds for tomorrow's growth, till the land, and we should have a good harvest.
Mr. Liang Eng-hwa.
Notwithstanding the Minister's very reassuring reply, I still have two further questions. Firstly, as what the Minister has just said, that our global trade systems being under stress, indeed the way things are developing, the world may indeed be trading less with each other or investing less with each other as well. And both are important. Trade investments are always a key driver for Singapore economy. So I want to ask the Minister, should we be concerned that more economies around the world are becoming more nationalistic? Government increasingly looking at balance of trade, balance of current account balances as a zero-sum, pure zero-sum game. How can tiny Singapore respond to this rising economic nationalism? Secondly, beyond exporting goods and services to the consumers of the world, what are the other ways we can sustain growth within our economy? And how can we create opportunities for Singapore? Can Singapore break up from this traditional C plus I plus G plus X kind of model of growth?
Mr. Speaker, sir, indeed, Mr. Liang Eng-hwa has raised a very serious concern for all of us, not just Singapore, but for all countries that are participating in the global trading system. As countries become more nationalistic and undertake more unilateralist or protectionist measures, it is a concern to all. The concern will be that there will not just be a shift in the supply chains or the distribution networks or the production sites. The greater concern will be a general downward fall in the investors' and consumer confidence. For Singapore to respond to this scenario, we must make sure that our companies have real capabilities that can allow them to interoperate across a more fragmented landscape. This is not easy, but this is something that we must do in the face of a potential fragmentation of the global economy. On your second question, as any economic students will know, the GDP equation of C plus I plus G plus X minus M, that is for GDP, gross domestic product. How must Singapore grow our economy going forward? What you are alluding to, if I read you correctly, is that we must not just look at what is happening domestically in Singapore. And indeed, that is true. There are three things that we should be focused on. First, what happens domestically? How do we help our companies and workers build real capabilities in order to contest in the new world environment? That is domestic. How do we help them access markets? How do we make sure that the rules allow our companies to overcome both the tariff and the non-tariff barriers? So that's the first part of how we need to run our economy. The second part of how we need to run our economy goes beyond the GDP equation that we just mentioned. And we talk about the GNP, the gross national product. How do we have a sizable base of companies that operate beyond Singapore, but contributing back to the Singapore's economy? And I will use the example of PSA. In PSA, once upon a time, we believed that the port is critical to Singapore, and we continue to believe so. But a port has two possible functions. One is to promote trade with a particular country. The other, most ports are like that. They serve the local domestic economy. But there's a second way of looking at the port, which is the way the Singapore port has developed. We are an exchange platform. So people don't just trade with Singapore, people trade through Singapore. So the vast majority of the containers that comes to Singapore comes through Singapore, and we are a major exchange hub. But having done that is still not sufficient, because trade routes might change. And the global supply chains and production patterns will also change, which is why that over the years, PSA have built up a string of ports all around the world, allowing them not just to be a port operator, but allowing them to be a global logistic players. So even if the goods do not come to Singapore or come through Singapore, they will trade on the PSA platforms or on the Singapore platform. This is a new way of looking at how we should do business. And that is why Enterprise Singapore ESG, together with the rest of our economic agencies, are spending so much effort to help our companies to use the world as our hinterland and never be constrained by our geographical size or geographical location. And that will be the next leg of our economic development. And that will be one way where we break the conventional paradigm of the GDP equation, which Mr. Liang mentioned about C plus I plus G plus X minus M. The third prong, which we must always bear in mind, and sometimes not so obvious in the public consciousness in our economic strategy, will be how we manage our reserves and where we put our investment. Today, we are in a fortunate position whereby for every $5 we spend in the budget, more than $1, slightly more than $1 this year, comes from our returns from our investment. This has given Singapore economy a significant boost and helped our budgetary constraints very much. And this, we must continue to harness our reserves judiciously to make sure that we create the biggest impact, positive impact for Singaporeans. So going forward, our economic strategy is not just about looking at what we can do domestically between local firms and foreign firms operating here. We must also look at how we grow the external wing, our GNP, and how we master our investment resources to make sure that we have the ammunition for us to weather the storm.
Mr. Saktiandi.
I would like to thank the Minister for answering the question just now. I think he highlighted the importance of strengthening the fundamentals in Singapore. I have two supplementary questions. One is related to something more detailed. In particular, the recent US Department of Commerce proposed export controls on 14 categories of technology. And I think it has some impact on Singapore, in particular what Minister mentioned in terms of investments as well. Whether he can share with me or with the House whether there will be potential impact on Singapore in terms of investments and potential tech-related restrictions that US imposes on China, and how it affects Singapore's companies as well. That's the first question. Second is whether Minister can share, Minister highlighted about the trade and tech, trade diversions and supply chain changes in the region. Other countries are also doing efforts to pull in some of these trade diversions into their countries. Can Minister share EDB's strategies in terms of reaping some of the benefits of pulling some of these production networks into Singapore, if any? Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, let me deal with the first one. Indeed, the restrictions on export of what is deemed as a sensitive technology will have implications for the entire global technological ecosystem. In the short term, various companies and countries may be able to take measures to shift their production or supply chains elsewhere. This is what we call the substitution effect. But in the longer term, what we are most worried is that it will lead to a bifurcation, if not a fragmentation, of the entire technological space. If that happens, then we are all for the worst of it, because it means that the global production system cannot be optimized as a whole but you'll be sub-optimized in parts. This will lead to increased costs, a fragmented production chain, and so forth. So that will be the greatest concern. Our Singapore strategy remains that we will try to be able to interoperate across the different jurisdictions and different systems. But we must also inspire confidence in people who put their investments here, that even in such a world, we are able to manage the different sensitivities across different countries properly. On your second part about the shifts in the global supply chain, indeed, to use a very specific example, some people have said that various productions and supply chains have shifted out from China in the global reorganization of the product chain. Some of it will come to some parts of the region around here. Some of it might come to Singapore. But I must say that Singapore doesn't compete with the rest of the regional economies for the entire shifts in the global production chain. There are some things that we do much better. There are some things that they will not be reallocated here. The simple example is this. For what we call the low mix, high volume production, most of them will not come to Singapore because they compete on the basis of scale, labor costs, land costs. But what will come to Singapore will be what we call the high mix, low volume. This is where trust, standards, quality, assurance, IP, intellectual property protections will become very important. And we have seen more of such investment siting in Singapore. So just to give an example, last week when I went to GSK to open the new facilities, today's precision medicine is no longer just producing high volume at low cost. Those kind of medicine and drugs will probably shift to other countries where there is a cost competitive advantage. But GSK will be very keen to work with EDB to site their high mix, low volume pharmaceutical products in Singapore. Why? Because for such high mix, low volume production, they require speed to market, which means that your supply chain, your distribution networks must be robust. That we do better than most other countries. For such industries, it will require a strong IP regime where people can enforce their intellectual property. That we also do well. For such productions to happen in small batches, high volume, you require a certain agility in your regulatory framework, which we also do well. So there are and there will be sectors that will play to Singapore's advantage, but it doesn't mean that everything that moves out of China or moves out of India will necessarily come to Singapore, and that's not our strategy.